Welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's very exciting to be here. I'm Fiona Wiley. I'm the Strategic Development Director in Healthcare here at Purple Agency. I'm very excited to be here for this event and want to extend a massive welcome to you all. This is actually the first event in OTC we've run for Purple Agency, and it's one I'm particularly passionate about. I've worked in OTC marketing for the last 20 years across a number of brands from Nicotine, Benadryl, Benylin, lots and lots of great well-known names. But rather than go on about my experience, I want to get to the good bits and introduce you to my brilliant panel that are joining me today. So first up, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves briefly. First up is Sid. Welcome, Sid.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Hello, Fiona. How are you doing? I'm Sid
Morning.
Dajani. Good morning. I'm a community pharmacist. I'm based in Bishopstoke. I'm a prescriber, a vaccinator. In a previous life, I was on the Royal Pharmaceutical Society for 20 years, 5 as treasurer on the PSNC and secretary to 2 LPCs, Lambeth, Southwark, Lewisham and Kensington, Chelsea, Westminster.
It's great to have you. Thank you. And next up is Andy Wines. Morning, Andy.
Good morning. Yes, nice to be here. So I'm Andy Wines. I'm currently the regional head for Europe and Africa at Prestige Consumer Health, a big American company. My career in OTC has been about 20 plus years, where I've worked for companies like Roche Consumer Health, Reckitt's, 7Cs, and obviously more recently this role. I'm mostly a marketeer and then a general manager, and I worked across a lot of categories, probably most of the big categories in OTC. So delighted to be here and share the discussions today.
Delighted to have you here. And next up, I've got Amy Johnson from Purple.
Morning.
Morning.
Hiya. I am an associate creative director at Purple Health, and my background is a bit of a mashup. I call myself an agency mutt because I'm actually started out on the more medical end of things and then evolved into a more creative role. I've also done quite a bit of creative strategy. Been in healthcare advertising about 15 years, frighteningly enough. And so you name it, I've worked on it. Everything from dog toothpaste all the way through to immuno-oncology. So great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As you'll agree, brilliant panel. Just a couple of quick admin pieces before we start. As I said right at the beginning, please feel free to write questions. There's lots coming in already. So I'll keep my eye on them and I'll try and throw them in as we go through. If I can't get through them all, I promise we will answer them as a group and post them after the event. There's a couple of live polls as well. Please take part because it will just make it more interesting as we go through the discussion. So without further ado, let's kick off. Post-pandemic, we have seen that pharmacists have done an absolutely brilliant job, not only supporting the sick, getting advice, getting medicines to people, administering vaccines, coupled with the NHS's desire to move more and more into their control. It seems only fitting that we called this the kind of chameleon, because the pharmacist has so many roles to hold: a business owner, an employer, a professional. But how can we best reach them with all of those different hats they're wearing? The good news is, from a latest survey from PAGB last year, 1 in 3 people said they were more likely to choose a local pharmacy as a first port of call for minor ailments post the pandemic, which is a really, really good step in the right direction. So are pharmacists the new superheroes of healthcare? That brings me on nicely to the first section, and one that I want to talk to us about. Sid, I'm going to come to you first. There are massive expectations from the NHS long-term plan regarding the role that pharmacists can play. We all know you can do it now. How do pharmacists, as business owners and as caregivers, feel about this growing reliance on self-care treatment? Is there more pressure, or are you ready to be the superheroes?
Well, first off, if I may say, Fiona, I wouldn't say we are the new superheroes of healthcare, because pharmacy has always been the soul of public health and the guardian of the public health for nearly 200 years. And there's apothecaries before that. So we've always been part of the NHS superhero tout ensemble. Our roles have always been around helping patients, promoting life, preventing disease, prolonging life, promoting health, providing self-care, and we have always been known as the experts in medicines. We've always been seen as the clinicians on the high street, and all pharmacists, not just me, but although I'm a prescriber of prescription-only medicines, we are all counter-prescribers, so we sell pharmacy-only medicines. We run public health campaigns, we have access to GP records, we like I said, we are vaccinators as well as prescribers, exactly like you mentioned. I've personally done thousands of vaccines ranging from travel health to flu to pneumonia, shingles, and since January, nearly 3,500 COVID vaccines. My pharmacy alone does about 13 NHS commissioned services. We do cholesterol checks, we do blood pressure checks, we do weight management, smoking cessation, and the list goes on and on and on. So we've always been involved with self-care, health and wellbeing support for independent living. So as a medicines man, or person, I should say, all pharmacists are the cornerstone of any modern healthcare system and the demimonde of any civilization. So we are not new superheroes, but I would say we are the unsung heroes of healthcare, because we are not as well recognized for our clinical roles as well as other healthcare professionals, and even by the government, some of the public. So the social value of community pharmacy is poorly understood and consistently undervalued. But like you said, a good thing to come out of this dreadful pandemic, however, has been a shining light on us which has showcased our skills and our knowledge. We need to build on that, and also on the fact that as a country and as a country and an NHS getting back on its feet, if it needs to deliver the NHS plan, it would be sheer madness if we did not further utilize and release the sheer genius of pharmacists. Give us more powers, increase the POM to P medicines, decrease the B to GSL status. Because let's be clear, we've got the premises that are fit for purpose, and we have both the professional expertise and the capability to help pick up the NHS. Very little is beyond our scope because we have the know-how and we can upskill our team members to allow us to cope with new pressures. But we can't just heal with kindness. The only thing stopping us delivering and becoming more well-recognized superheroes is that we've got a professional leadership body which is a bit unfit for purpose. We have a poor understanding of community pharmacist teams. And we have very great financial pressures. We can do more. We just need to be better directed, informed support to help us reduce pressures that would take us away from patient care.
Okay, good. And I'm going to throw that straight to you, Andy, and say, but is Sid a rare breed here? We've heard how proactive he is, how much he gets involved in. From your experience, are all pharmacists ready to embrace the changes as Sid are, or is he one of a kind?
Yeah, I think it's an absolute mixture, Fiona. I think that there's no doubt that there's some tremendous amount of change going on in pharmacy. Lots of new roles and lots of new opportunity, like never before. And it's great to see. It's great to see many pharmacists like Sid embracing all of that and being real pioneers. In truth, I think we find it's a mixture. There are many people who are following Sid's example and changing brilliantly. But in other parts of pharmacy, it's not the same. People find it harder. I think my observation is probably that in a lot of independent and sort of pharmacist owner pharmacies, the pharmacist is much more committed, or is very committed to those changes and furthering their business because it's their own business. Often we find it's perhaps a little bit more different in some of the bigger chains of pharmacies where perhaps you haven't got the owners on site and so forth. I think the other thing is that the role of the pharmacist is becoming far more people-centric now, and perhaps a lot of people in pharmacy have not been trained that way. Perhaps 20 or 30 years ago, when choosing to go to university and train as a pharmacist, a lot of youngsters were not sort of thinking, I want to go into we're thinking they're going into a technical profession, not a people-centric one. So we should probably reflect that. A lot of pharmacists probably want some training and to cope with this sort of new role and the new requirements. But it's it's a real mixed bag. But it's brilliant that it's changing fast, and it's brilliant that people like Sid are there sort of leading the way, because there is so much more that pharmacy can do. Particularly when I think a lot of consumers are very disappointed with GP service that they get. There's a tremendous amount that can be that pharmacists can do, and it's great to see the change.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I mentioned the PAGB results already, but there was another survey from the MPA that said 87% of people believe that local pharmacies are the better way to obtain healthcare advice. Are there certain areas where we think pharmacy is well placed? We mentioned minor ailments before, but clearly you're far more qualified than just dealing with minor ailments. Perhaps ones that will have more of a taboo angle. So we've talked about this before, Sid, contraception, sexual dysfunction. We've seen lots of POMs of peace switches come into this space. Are pharmacists happy to have those awkward conversations that require that detailed consultation that you just cannot get time to talk to a GP about?
Yeah. Let's not forget pharmacy and pharmacists and pharmacy teams are in the business of helping lives and saving lives. We're very experienced in dealing with all sorts of taboo subjects for many years. We're trained to discuss and approach sensitive subjects. For example, we've been providing emergency hormone contraception, substance misuse services, Hep B, Hep C testing, STD testing. And back in the day, we even did pregnancy testing. So we knew when a woman was pregnant before her partner did. Mm-hmm. So my pharmacy example is also a safe haven pharmacy where we help victims of domestic abuse. And even just last week, I had to call the police to help a minor that walked in asking for help. So this is a role that's not new to us. And what's really important is to remember is that we're easily accessible, most widely accessible healthcare professional in the world, or at least on this side of Mars anyway. We're a walk-in service without an appointment times. There are very long opening times. We're the most seen healthcare professional because you usually just see us within 5 minutes. So when a matter is highly sensitive, dangerous, or taboo, then it's usually time sensitive and urgent. And that's why pharmacy is in a unique position to make all the difference. Because as we all know, the greater the access, the quicker the prognosis, the better the outcomes. And where we can't help, we would refer anyway. So, for example, last week we had an elderly patient ring up and asking if she could increase her dose of ranitidine, when in fact what was happening was she was suffering from chest pain due to a cardiac event. So we knew that straight away and we referred her and we saved her life. So in that respect, we this is nothing new, but it might be new to the public who are unaware of it.
And off the back of that, questions just come in and said, Andy, you mentioned the role that this is becoming a more people-centric role. And given that everybody's now thinks they're some sort of Dr. Google, how do we make sure that these conversations are going into pharmacy and they're having these conversations with consumers rather than kind of self-diagnosis? Now we all think we're experts.
I mean, Sid has just sort of given the answer there a little bit with his last statement, hasn't he? Which is, Dr. Google is great for getting instant clues as to what your ailment might be, but consumers are often misdiagnosing or panicking or sort of fearing the worst. I think when you feel ill, you often don't behave quite as rationally as when you feel normal, and so that there can be a tendency of people when you're feeling ill to panic a bit, and people will often misdiagnose themselves. I think Google's great for getting some clues, but there's no substitute to talking to somebody very, very quickly. And of course, you're a pharmacist. You can see your local pharmacist within 5 or 10 minutes. They're only minutes away from you. Which is probably not the service you'll get from a GP. So I mean, pharmacy is a brilliant resource, and you'll know that you're definitely getting a great answer.
Thank you. Can I just quickly add, Fiona, just two very quick ones? Yeah. Medicines treat symptoms, but pharmacists treat people. There's a holistic approach to this. You can't get advice from Google when you have a question, more importantly, and also more important, more than anything, we sometimes spot symptoms that the patient themselves don't know. The symptoms might be the same, the cause might be different, the treatment will be different, and if they waste time not getting the right treatment, it will cause hospitalization, all sorts of problems, and obviously that knocks on to mental health, depression, social value, and so on and so forth. So thanks for that, Andy. Absolutely spot on. Thank you. Can you run for government for us, please?
No pressure. Actually, there's another question that's just come in. Sid or Andy, you might be able to answer this, but why are pharmacists not recognised by their healthcare peers? So why do GPs consider pharmacists almost as shopkeepers rather than everything you've just told us? They should be working hand in hand together.
I mean, I might take that one a little bit, and I mean, try and make this positive. I mean, I think many years ago, pharmacists. I mean, one of the criticisms of pharmacists is that they'll often stay in the dispensary behind the counter and not talk to patients, and which makes them very. I know a lot of pharmacists are changing, but that is a very traditional view. If you go back many years, I mean, 20 years ago, I lived in Switzerland, and it's quite interesting just to see what pharmacies are like on the continent. And I would say that where I lived in the pharmacies in the village, the pharmacists would walk the front of the shop. That they would never be, sit in the back. They would always meet and greet the customers. They'd know all their customers personally, and they would walk the shop and talk to the customers. And it was a very different experience being there than it was being in the UK. Now, I think pharmacies are changing, and I think that the best pharmacists are walking the shop and are out the front giving advice. But it's not the same everywhere, and I think public's views are perhaps a little bit behind the times when they think of what they used to many years ago and not how the industry is becoming.
Yeah, good point, Andy. I mean, I'll just add 3 very quick points to that. One is that we've always had very weak leadership in pharmacy, whereas the doctors, nurses and dentists have been very proactive, I think, and it's not got any better, it's got worse. Second thing is, I've done presentations to GPs, pharmacists, dentists, opticians, and it's interesting, the GPs would challenge you. The dentists would look at you and still think, well, they won't challenge you, but they'll still think they're better than you. The pharmacists would actually write down everything you've said, and then nobody even write down to the hello and the goodbye. So I think that there's a confidence issue within the profession that we need to wrench out. And the third thing is that due to history and poor promotion of pharmacists generally, we're still misunderstood as to what we do. So in that respect, the publications, the advertising, the promotion of pharmacists has always left us as lackluster, very unproud, hidden in the back, and almost like the cockroaches of healthcare, which clearly we're not.
Yeah,
we're not just shopkeepers.
Yeah, no, mate. And Amy, I'm keen to pull you in and say, like, from a completely different perspective, obviously not being a pharmacist and not being on the brand side, having a more kind of consumer, I'm going to say, view. What's your view on what the guys have been saying?
But yeah, I mean, Andy actually mentioned something really interesting at the very beginning, talking a little bit about the discrepancy, but between independent, I mean, I would call them independent pharmacists who own their own practice, and the more chain pharmacists. And I'm just wondering, do we, when it comes to from a communications standpoint, do we need to tailor our comms to the different types of pharmacists, or should we take a one-size-fits-all approach and aim for the highest bar, like Sid? Where should we go with our comms? Is it tailored, or should we go for the high bar?
Yeah. I'm going to throw it. Can I throw it open? I want to put a poll out there because we're just presuming that as well. We're going to come on and talk about this a little bit more, that people are not putting enough attention on pharmacists. But I just want to open up a poll and say, where are you putting? We've got a really good crowd in the audience. Where are people putting their marketing efforts? Is it going to GPs? Is it going to pharmacists? Or is it going to consumer? And I would really appreciate you taking part because it makes a massive difference. And we'll have a look at the results in a minute as well, because I think that will be quite telling.
Just while that's running, I mean, to answer Amy's question, or the question that was posed, sorry, that saying, saying, should we tailor our communications to different audiences?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great question. I mean, the great sales forces will always, know their customer and segment their customers into different types. I mean, there's one question I think that's been raised in the chat here to say, in an era of perhaps not personal calls, but video calls or remote calls to pharmacists, how will the world change? I mean, I would still be an advocate of face-to-face calls. I think there's no substitute for the salesperson really knowing their pharmacist and really understanding, is this pharmacist a social person? Is it one who likes technical information? How do I interact with them? And I think that the salesperson can always interact their own behavior when they know the pharmacist and give the best of whatever needs to be imparted.
Yeah.
So, I would be a big fan of not changing the world too much and getting back to personal contact, because that's, for me, that's the best way.
Yeah, and interestingly, someone just posted in the chats, haven't said who they are or what they do, but GPs are becoming more and more inaccessible and harder to market, actually. And, the fact that we can have a face-to-face conversation with a pharmacist, like you say, if we can get the right message, if we can tailor it, that seems like the best way to go. So I'm going to move us on, and I'm going to talk about the next section, because it's very clear we're all in alignment. Pharmacists are fundamental to making a shift, given their history, given they've always been at the forefront of self-care. How do marketeers position pharmacists as the first port? And I think this moves us on nicely. So what can brands help them do? Sid, you've got a whole group of people that are very keen to interact and listening. Tell me, what can they do to make your life easier and to really get the support of the pharmacist?
Thank you for that. That's also another good question. Great question. I mean, it's very important to realise that all pharmacists have the same contract. So we're all regulated the same, and the government is trying to push for consistency and efficiency. So we all need the same sort of targeting. Obviously, the communications could be slightly different, but all pharmacists are going to be going up to a higher level of consistency. One of the things I already mentioned is that we already need to up the game and raise our profile. We need your help to not only, as I said, release the genius of pharmacists, but also promote how well trained we are and for the public to use us as a first port of call. Another way would be to help us to relevantly train our team members to upskill them, so therefore freeing up our time to be more clinical and use our specialisms. We have lost the rep calling, and I'm a great advocate for reps. And out of the few we do have, many do not have the answers to the questions when you ask them around clinical data or evidence base. There's no substance in what they give us. And that's so important, because my team need confidence in what they're supplying and advising patients on to give them an informed choice. So that's really important. And I'd like the reps to help us forge and build relationships with other healthcare professionals, including PCNs. And, in some ways, as leader of the PCN for Winchester Rural South, I can also introduce them to local GPs. And so whilst they might become more harder to access through cold calling or calls, we can access them through the primary care networks. But it also doesn't help when we don't see the same people all the time. We need to build relationships with them. And the reps that I've been seeing, I've hardly seen twice. They've got a higher turnover than what you get at a crematorium. So I think it's really important that we need to invest in people rather than the product sometimes, because the people push the product.
Yeah, absolutely. And Andy, you're a member of the PAGB, which we know is so important to bringing companies together that have all got kind of a common goal. How do we get companies coming together and supporting pharmacists rather than each brand and company trying to push their own agenda? Because clearly from what we've heard from Sid, there's a greater need out there to raise awareness of what pharmacists can do.
Yeah, this is a tricky question. I think in theory, I think a lot of people would say yes. I think the PHB does an awful lot to promote the pharmacy industry already. I think what we're talking about specifically here is, is there additional work or additional campaigns that could be supported by the industry to highlight the competence and the breadth of the role of pharmacy? In theory, yes, absolutely. I think in reality, it's a challenging world we live in, and I think as leaders of businesses, we're all fighting for market share and growth of our own brands, and we have important messages, that we have to put across about our brands. In order to maintain and grow our market share. So I think this is a very noble objective, difficult to pull off, but I wouldn't, but I wouldn't discount it. But it would need a lot more coordination, perhaps through a body like, it's something we could pick up as PAGB. But I think as business leaders, we'll always have, priorities to fight for our own brands.
Of course, Amy, you and I have talked a lot about some of the public health campaigns that have really stood out. Are there any particular ones that have kind of really caught your attention and we could build on?
Yeah, I mean, in sort of researching for this event, there was a campaign in 2018. It was I think it was Help Us Help You. I think we've got an example. So on the left-hand side, you see, so your pharmacy team are here to help you and your family stay well. So you had the Stay Well campaign in 2018. Then they slightly amended that in 2019 to this Help Us Help You. Don't wait until you feel worse. Go in and see your pharmacist. And just focusing on those two on the left, I question it because I look at those and they're very samey. They don't have any standout. We know that as consumers, we see in excess of 1,000 marketing messages a day. It's a competitive world out there, and that kind of that kind of campaign to me isn't cutting through anything. I also think it's quite generic in its messaging, and putting the onus really on the patient to come in. It's not saying what the pharmacist can really offer in a specific way. So I've got some problems with those campaigns on that level. But that said, having spoken to Sid, I think he disagrees a little bit with how good those campaigns are. So I'll let him ruin me now.
Okay, go on, Sid. Be nice.
Well, look, they're both successful for different reasons. How about that? The ones on the left are very successful in the sense that they were funded by the government. They were everywhere. They were on TV, they were on newspapers, they were on radio, they were on bus stops, and everybody came into us and said, what can you do? And, let us know more. So in that respect, it was good. But you're absolutely right. If that was handled and advertised and promoted as a brand, then it would be as impactful as a one-handed clap. There would be absolutely useless. Somebody in advertising would lose their jobs. But because the NHS supported and funded it, it was great. So I agree with you. The ones on the right, all those are fantastic. They're eye-catching. People love them. The amount of ears I've syringed because people didn't realize we deal with ears as it goes up. So they both have advantages. And these sort of campaigns need to do is align their strategies with the whole picture of the NHS self-care, and then the brand can come in. So you've got the whole picture, and then this is how we can help the strategy, the alignment, the NHS, the public health, and so on and so forth. So I've seen the benefits of both, and I totally agree with Amy that the ones on the right are far more impactful. They're the sort of things you'd see now. If the NHS supported those, I think pharmacists will be the sung heroes of the NHS as opposed to the unsung ones that we are now. And we won't be seen as glorified shopkeepers. We'd be seen as clinicians in our own right with a 5-year degree and all sorts of medical knowledge. Thank you.
Yeah, the ones on the right are amazing, were, I believe, also funded by NHS England, and but this is an illustrator who works for Disney, and so they've upped their game. I just think it's amazing to see the journey creatively from 2018 all the way through to 2020 when the ones on the right were released. Everything about them, it's more specific, it's more eye-catching. I'm guessing it's probably aimed at a slightly younger audience as well, possibly young parents. So to me, there's insight there, there's creativity there. It's got a hell of a lot going for it. So yeah.
Amy, where we would disagree is that where you say it's more specific, it is. Whereas the ones on the left, I know they're both NHS, whereas the ones on the left were more generic as to what we could do. So, for example, if you had earache, that could be sinusitis. If you had a sore throat, that might be a strep infection rather, or even thrush. So one thing we can treat, one thing we can't. So in all respects, I agree with you. But again, the one on the right is far more eye-catching. But if anything, it puts us back into just OTC rather than the whole holistic place where OTC has a very important place.
Yeah, good point.
I'm trying to keep up with the questions here because there's so many coming in, but one that's just came in is from Trevor. Thank you. He was saying when he worked at RB, they did some training across competitors, indigestion, heartburn, a kind of duo piece without denigrating each other's products. They kind of showcased the range. What do you think about that, Sid? Is it possible to do more kind of co-creation and education on categories rather than it's ours, it's all about our brand?
Yes, we need to basically need to switch pharmacy from dimmer mode to full beam. So it's in your face, proud and unabashed. So one of the things you would basically do is not use words like consumer and customer, but maybe patient and public. Another thing is basically, rather than just promote the product, promote health, promote the welfare of a patient and the product that can help them achieve that. So I think we need to rethink the paradigm as to how we publicize it and make us less as shopkeepers with products off the shelf. Here you go, madam. There you go. As opposed to somebody coming in asking for health advice, and you know what? Here's a product you might have heard of that works better than the rest. So I think if you focus more on the education in pharmacy and the teams, focus more on a holistic approach with your brand as an add-on, saying we can achieve these targets. I think that's really important, because anything that works with our profession, the government, other healthcare professionals and patients, will help to extend the clinical role of pharmacy and the breadth of our contribution to healthcare, public health and social care. So in that respect, we're not against each other. We just have to align the advertising and the promotion a lot more efficiently.
Okay. So have you got any brand campaigns that you think, well, that was exactly what we needed? We've talked about general ones that do kind of public health, but OTC manufacturers are still going to want to do their brand campaigns. So have we got any examples of good?
I mean, obviously, Amy's come out with some really good ones there. I think the other really good ones would tend to be Viagra and Ella-1, because when they first came out, it was like, oh my God, could pharmacists really give them out and whatever? And when we were sort of like knowing all about them for ages, and we were showing that we were a ready-made solution to a lot of people who've got concerns that can't access the NHS. Even before COVID, GPs were hard to get hold of. A&E had something like 50% of admissions to visits to A&E that were unnecessary that we could have helped, which could have saved the NHS millions of pounds. So I would say Viagra and Ella-1 were extremely important, helped to shift the focus on us as really important high street scientists.
Can we put the slide up on, I think we've got some examples of the recent work they've done, because we've seen a real evolution in those brands as well, versus when they first did their switch to where they've got to now. And I agree, you know, some of the Ella-1 stuff is absolutely brilliant. So what do we think, you know, so many questions, I'm trying to keep up with them about what are the essentials of marketing to pharmacists? People saying, do pharmacists still want to attend events from brands? You know, funding's being cut for pharmacists. Where do they want to focus? What do you think? What's your answer to that, Andy? Do you think, and Sid, I guess, what do you think? Where should we be putting our important priorities?
Andy, do you want to go first?
I think the question on, do pharmacists still want to attend training? I don't know. I might refer that one to Sid. I think that there's still I think most companies are still placing enormous emphasis on training pharmacists and promoting their brands to pharmacists. You know, it's a fundamental way of building the competence of our brands. I don't think that's ever. I think that's more relevant now than ever. It's great to see switches coming through. I mean, the two examples you've highlighted there are two brilliant campaigns from brands that have switched and provide a very obvious need to go and to be detailed and to present themselves to pharmacists in that way. But I think it's with the increasing with the great new role of pharmacists. I think brands will continue to be very committed to detailing and advertising to the pharmacy profession.
I just had a question come in. Somebody said, was it actually Ella-1 and Viagra marketing that was effective, or was it the fact that it was a really novel POM-to-P switch, Sid?
Both. It had style and it had substance. The style was that it was exactly impactful. It was colourful. You couldn't ignore it. It was picked up by the papers. It created a buzz. Both of them. Ally was another one. The other aspect of it was that there was a good backup supporting team as well. So my staff received things in the post. They got trained up on them. We had questionnaires to give to patients to give them reassurance. So it wasn't just about us knowing what we were doing, but it's also, the reassurance to the public who didn't think we knew what we were doing or weren't sure and a bit shy. We've got consultation rooms. We had private discussions. They took away leaflets with them. So even if they didn't purchase on the day, they went away, thought about it. They were better informed. They didn't go to Dr. Google and get out-of-date information, biased information, wrong information. And my staff were confident about speaking to people. They were far more astute in picking up signs, seeing the person standing at the back of the pharmacy biting his fingernails, not knowing how to come to the counter. So the approach was there. So it was the whole tout ensemble. It was everything that really came together. It was, and also the difference here was that the strategy in marketing and training and promoting included community pharmacists from the outset. Before, they were set in aspic and then thrown out into pharmacy as a bolt-on or an add-on. So it was pharmacists involved from the beginning right to the end on that. And that's why it was so successful. And it's still successful now. And the NHS has even now given us an NHS service to give out the morning after pill and Ella-1 because it was so successful.
Okay. I'm going to take a quick look at the poll because I've had a few people coming and saying, what's the result of the poll? So can the admin team just put the poll up? So interestingly, I mean, this backs up everything we're saying. I was like, I've bribed you all, but consumers coming out top of the poll and pharmacists coming out bottom of the poll in terms of where we're putting our marketing efforts. So I think that moves us again very nicely onto, I'm going to try and throw this back to Amy and say, how do agencies and clients make HCP comms that represent what we've heard? Because Amy, do creatives just want to make sexy TV ads aimed at consumers, and that's why there's so little love coming to pharmacist comms?
I think we all, I mean, I'm not going to lie. I think we all go through that stage where we want to make the big sexy work that we show to our mom and go ta-da, and walk away with all the awards. But you do get a more balanced view as you get a little bit older. And it becomes a focus on just wanting to work on really good briefs. And how do you make a good brief? It all comes from insight. And if you don't have good insight about the audience or the audiences that you're talking to, your brief is going to be rubbish. And your work's going to be rubbish. I don't care how sexy and pretty and how many awards it might win. If you don't have good insight, at the end of the day, it's not going to resonate with the audience it needs to resonate with. So that's why I think any agency that, and maybe Andy might disagree, but I think any agency that a marketing team chooses to work with needs to have experience in the audience they're talking to. Sid in particular was talking about how science matters to pharmacists. You can't just tweak your consumer campaign and roll it out to pharmacists. No, these guys spent 5 years in school. They know the science and it matters to them. So I think you need to choose an agency that understands science and knows how to communicate it to the appropriate audience. So hopefully, oh, good, I got a clap from Sid. That's always good.
That's always encouraging.
Yeah,
Andy, I'm just going to throw it over to you as well. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. No. Look, I think pharmacists and consumers, everybody's human. Everybody is both pools of people are bombarded with lots of messages and all day long, and you have to break through the clutter. I think pharmacists still need to be. You still need to communicate in an impactful way. I would never advocate, for either consumers or for pharmacists trying to make work that's not breakthrough or disruptive or highly interesting. So I think it's always important to have that sort of creativity at the centre of brief. But I think what's different is that with the pharmacy profession, you've got to have some substance below the creativity at the top. If you're just going in with lots of style, as the phrase goes, to pharmacists, you get found out. You've got to have underpinning it. You've got to have a lot of facts and substance, good scientific detail or good rational arguments. I think it is possible to market to consumers without substance and be successful. I think but I don't think you can do that to pharmacists. So I think the burden here, I think for the pharmacy advertising profession, if you like, it's the challenge is to be able to do both simultaneously, which is a skill.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go back now, Sid, because there's quite a few questions coming in around the POM to P switches again. What if you haven't got a novel POM to P switch? How can you replicate success without necessarily having a major innovation? Have we got any tips for people in that space?
Yeah, and that really ties in with what just Andy and Amy have just said. I've seen that poll and I'm a bit disappointed because I always thought that there was targeting towards pharmacists, but it was just very badly done. I'm now realising that it was never done, and that explains a lot. So 2 words spring to mind: missed opportunities, because clearly we are not marching in lockstep, and we're not aligned and communicating properly. And the other thing about it is that patients come in, even with a highly multi-million-pound medicines campaign, if somebody comes to us and we don't think it's right for them, we'll choose something else that we have more confidence in. So I think really that people out there need to rethink how they do things, because they're just throwing the water out, the dirty water out, which with the baby. So that's not a good thing. Talking about POM2P switches, we always could do with more. I mean, I'm a great advocate of pharmacists having antibiotics to prescribe, because if anything, we would be far more stringent with when we give it out rather than just give it out. We could easily give out antibiotics. I could prescribe it as a private prescriber. So having more NHS commissioned services would tend to help. I think also with the POM2P, we need more of it, because as the population gets older, as people live longer, the NHS already wasn't coping before COVID. So if we want to optimize the use of medicines, support people to self-care, support people to live healthier lives and live independently, we're going to need more innovative POM2P. So what I would say is be brave, be ambitious, go out there, talk to us, and we'll tell you exactly which ones we would like to have to increase our armory to help you, your family, the public, your company, the NHS, social care, public care, and the public's health.
And sadly, there's someone anonymous who's come on in support saying, as an organisation, we have recognised the importance of pharmacists, particularly in their role in PCNs. Moving forward, we are developing campaigns which either include pharmacists or are aimed solely at pharmacists. I can't say that's brilliant because you haven't put your name, but that sounds like exactly what we're saying is one of the fundamentals of what we need to do.
I mean, look on the on the manufacturer side, one of the interesting dilemmas for us is always, do we choose to communicate with consumers or pharmacists or both? And ideally both. I think different brands have different profiles, don't they? Some brands, brands that are pharmacy only, of course, you're going to put an awful lot more of your spend into communication with pharmacists. But every business has to make its own choice as to where it spends its money for different brands according to where they're successful and what they deem to be the right the right insights around who they need to communicate with. I think it's very hard to argue that there are some brands that you shouldn't communicate all your brands to pharmacy, and I think most companies do, but it's always going to be a varying proportion of the pie depending on what the profile of the brand is.
So if I could just add to that, so we have 5 health campaigns a year, and if your OTC product matches that, if you know what the 5 health campaigns are, like coming up to winter, whether it's seasonal and hay fever, etc., or flu, if you can add that to your campaign at that time to support pharmacists, and that all fits in with the agenda, because as Andy said earlier, and as Amy actually also chimed in with, we have a rapidly changing landscape, and it's been happening for years, and it's going to keep going. If you don't have your finger on the pulse all the time, you'll lose the rhythm, and you'll be out of touch very quickly, and your product might have millions to be on the campaign, but it'll be very unsuccessful on the shelf, very unsuccessful through pharmacy. So by incorporating us from an early stage, you will definitely benefit, and it would also turn publicity into revenue. And that's what it's all about. And if that revenue can also be matched with NHS pressures, then we don't need to lose pharmacists or compete between pharmacists and consumer spending. What we would be doing is aligning the stars together to do it. And it's actually very easy to do. You just need to know who to speak to and then build up those networks. And that's where we've all been working. We've all been working independently rather than together. And all of that is wasted effort. And it's been repeating the same mistakes of the past. And that's not the way forward.
I think on that, there's a couple of questions specifically about stuff that we've always done. Sid, is there a role still for paper-based training? Will events come back and will pharmacists still attend? What sort of comms do pharmacists want to get specifically? Have you got thoughts on those, Sid?
Yeah. I mean, you can imagine our time is really hard. I mean, I was doing 18 hours a day when, at the height of COVID for 3 months, didn't get a day off, you name it.
Yeah,
so what I would suggest is I'm very selective about where I do go for meetings, and I would go for meetings. So I'd say they're horses for courses. So if it's something about evidence-based, something I can sit down and read in my own time, that's great. There's also internet courses, which are great. And it's lovely because my staff could sit around their tea breaks or when we have quiet periods, and they could develop certificates as part of the training, which is part of our contractual obligations. So supporting my staff, supporting me train my staff would be great to help me achieve the pharmacy quality service points. But I would say there would be a huge amount of importance with face-to-face meetings, especially with other healthcare professionals.
Yep.
Not the same faces all the time. As lovely as they are, as beautiful and as young as they are, as wonderful as they are, it'd be great if we had a mixture of professions, because we've all got points to make, multidisciplinary training, multidisciplinary working out how we can work with each other in co-opetition as well as cooperation. And in that regard, networking, developing PCNs. My God, the golden egg would be that you could get doctors, nurses, pharmacists, dentists, even opticians to agree, where we talk about diabetes and blood pressure, in the same room, because we all have the same targets to meet. And if we can all work together, walking in each other's shoes, if you like, my God, would that be a revelation? It would be almost a revolution rather than an evolution of roles. And I've been calling for this for years. And everybody says, good idea, interesting concept. Nobody ever does it. It's not going to be easy. But I think if the first one that gets it will forever be the Pele of pharmacy or the healthcare professionals.
Who's going to be the brave one and step forward, I guess, is always the question.
Is that where COVID might have helped us? And actually we could start to do things virtually. I mean, I know you were saying face-to-face is better. But when you've got all of those different HCPs, and trying to organize diaries with HCPs is a nightmare, I can say, then actually doing virtual meetings like we're doing right now, is that going to open the door a little bit? Does that give us the opportunity? So do you think pharmacists in particular would embrace this kind of tech, and we could continue to do this even after we take off our masks and can go back face to face?
Yeah. As I said, horses for courses. So this sort of thing is great for when you're imparting information or advice, or, raising questions, or and it's convenient. But nothing quite beats face-to-face networking with doctors, nurses. And sometimes the best conversations aren't had when somebody's presenting. It's actually by the coffee table. Or, hi, you're so-and-so, I've heard about this thing. Can we work together? I mean, I was doing a COVID vaccination clinic. And one of the doctors came up and said, you said you deal with diabetes, and I've seen some things on the internet about your work. Can we catch up together? That was done at a COVID vaccination clinic. It didn't happen through this sort of network or through the email. So everything's different. I mean, but having said that, if you booked an event 4 months down the line, when we know things are done and people can clear their diets and they know it's important, believe you me, it'll be a priority above walking the dog, above, watching EastEnders, to actually go, not that I watch EastEnders, or did I just give that away?
Uh-huh.
No. But, we would all make time to do it. So it would be a priority for me to attend something like that, where maybe it could be sponsored by an event. It could be the bigger, wider NHS agenda. Public health could be social care, public health, social care, the cracks in between, how we avoid them. And then a brand could be promoting itself there. And we could be networking with other HCPs. And potentially then the pharmaceutical industry, the healthcare professionals, and even the public patient involvement side of things would all come together. So I'd say if it was further down the line, if it was promoted, trust me, it would be a priority, and it would overtake a lot of other things that would be taking our time.
Andy and Amy, I just want to ask one more kind of formal question before I try and get through some of the questions. We've talked about all the essentials. How do we shake this up? How do we make marketing to pharmacists exciting? There's so much we need to do as agencies and as brands. What else can we do that's different? Who's got? I'm going to pick on one of you. Amy, can you go first?
Well, I mean, Sid has kind of ruined my answer, unfortunately, because I was going to say, digitally we can do so much now, and COVID has opened our box of toys, kind of, in a way. But I think he's actually hit the nail on the head with the idea of taking a more multidisciplinary approach. I think, especially in comms, we tend to put people in little buckets, and that makes our comms so much easier to do. And we can have certain messages for certain people. And I think maybe that's a little too constrained. And we need to be having those multidisciplinary discussions and involving pharmacists, or even having pharmacists lead them, because I think there's a lot of insight that we're getting from pharmacists like Sid, that GPs, nurses, even dentists, whatever, just don't know. So I'm quite excited about that idea of bringing people together. So I know that's not a very specific answer, but I really like that theme.
Andy, any thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, just two things are going through my mind. Also, slightly reading the Q&As. I mean, there's no substitute for. I mean, what I want to talk about is there's no substitute for doing the basics really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Trevor made a comment here saying that some of the biggest OTC brands have been built in pharmacy, and I absolutely agree. I think that the very best brands have always had either started or had a very healthy and strong commitment to detailing and promoting themselves to pharmacists and winning over the blessing and support of pharmacists. And I think companies abandon that at their peril. So I would always say that has a very important component. So I would always advocate that. I think the other thing is there's no substitute for being really snappy and excellent with your messaging. Whether you deliver it in a face-to-face or a digital way, if you have great messages backed up with good substance, and you can communicate them in a snappy way to your audience, and pharmacists are no different, that's always going to be successful. I think one of the questions I just read was, I think, asked a couple of times, switch categories are very exciting, aren't they, when you bring new brands to pharmacy? But what about the old-fashioned brands, the brands that have been around forever? And look, I think the reality is that even in cough and cold and analgesics, there's always a new consumer who will walk into a pharmacy for the first time and say, my sore throat's really, really bad. Have you got something stronger than what I bought in Tesco, or something like this? And there's always a member of the public who can be convinced by a pharmacist for the first time. And so there's always a role as brand owners for us to keep our brands salient and popular with pharmacists, because there's always going to be a consumer who gets switched by a pharmacist in that sort of situation. So you've got to keep going. In those well-established categories, there's still a relevant job to do. And if you understand consumer insights, if you understand how pharmacy medicine can give consumers a better treatment, and if you understand how to convey that to a pharmacist and staff in a snappy way, you're going to be successful.
And I think allergy is a great example of that as well, right? Because working in allergy, every year used to hear so many people saying, I've never suffered before. This is the first time I've ever suffered. And you're like, yeah, okay. But that's another great example, isn't it? Of, it's been around forever. But people are brought in new to suffering every year.
Well, this is it. We treat people from cradle to grave. So even the same individual, their needs would change just as the ever-growing population change. But I think the bottom line is, if we're going to work with the pharmaceutical industry, the bottom line has to be, we always have to find ways to keep people better for longer and sicker for shorter. And that's really the bottom line of whatever thing that we would need to be promoting to the public.
We've talked most of the time about how brilliant and how fundamentally we think we should be helping pharmacists. There's one question that's come in that I'm just going to sneakily throw out at the end. Somebody's saying, how do we stop pharmacists trading down from brands? How do we stop them recommending own label and promoting our brands? Any thoughts on that before we wrap up?
Well, absolutely. I mean, some of the brands are actually better than the generics. And again, that comes down to education and information dissemination. But a lot of pharmacists aren't aware of that because they're not being advised or supported in lack of time. So this is where going back to that supporting us to be trained. So, for example, I'm going to mention a brand, Zovirax. I mean, that brand there works a lot quicker on the tingling, and there's evidence to support it. And I promise you, I haven't got shares in it or received any funding from it. But it works quicker than the generic. So when you advise a patient saying this brand is better because at the tingling stage, it goes a lot quicker, and it's a false economy to go for the generic, they all go for the one that saves their good looks and their lips. So and sometimes the brands might work a bit quicker if you're dealing with pain killing. So it's all about that information and the substance rather than the style. So we don't always go for our own brand. We would go for what's best for the patient, because if we don't give them the best advice, they will go somewhere else and it will be very hard to get them back again. So if you're promoting a brand, tell us why it's better than the alternative, cheaper one, because otherwise it's false economy.
I think what is clear, we could talk for all day on this. This is and I can't believe the number of questions we've had come in. We've got 32 questions down the side. I'm sorry, there's no way I've got through 32 questions. So I promise as a panel, we will take them away and we will answer all of those questions. For me personally, some great nuggets. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. And like I said, I could just keep going and going, but there were some really key things that jumped out to me. We talked about with Sid said, missed opportunities. Clearly there is just so much more we can be doing in this space. We talked about terms we can be using, the patient, the public, and start all communicating in the same language, which would be a massive step forward. Andy, you mentioned particularly style and substance, which is not something we always hear. That's going to particularly stick in my mind following this event. How do we get that balance of really beautiful work? And Amy showed us the great public health, I agree, is one of my favourites, but as well as combining it with clinical evidence in a way that we can help SIDS train his staff and educate them and take some of those pressures off. So yes, so much to talk about. I hope I've covered it all. I just want to say thank you to everyone for staying super engaged. There's lots of you on. I'm really sorry I didn't get through all your questions, but we will follow up. I also want to say a massive thank you to Nikki at Purple and Enrique, who have made this possible and made it all look slick and beautiful. That was definitely nothing to do with me. So huge thank you to them and most of all, thank you to my panelists for being involved and having a really great discussion. It was such a pleasure to talk to you this morning. So thank you very much. And thanks Purple Agency for hosting. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope we get to do more of these and have a good rest of the day.